you, did you ever like think about, maybe I just want to stay in the agency world for a long time? Like, what about the internal, the corporate side really attracted you, or you just want to do something else?
It's a great question. I think at that time, to be honest, I was really burnt out. And when you become a manager at that level, a lot of what you're doing is more so business development, going in front of client, trying to get the requisitions, prove that your team is knowledgeable and kind of get that business. And a friend of mine growing up had a friend who worked at LinkedIn selling LinkedIn recruiter and LinkedIn products to agency recruiters. And I was like, this actually is a really great opportunity for me to learn a software sales skill set, but also work in a name brand company to kind of get larger company experience. It was definitely a risk because pivoting a career like that, you essentially take a step back, right? But it was an invaluable experience because I've been able to use some of those sales strategies in recruiting and be able to use that, throughout my career in every job.
It might have felt like a risk to you at that time, but in retrospect, if someone were to look at your LinkedIn, your career progression, it also just makes sense. I mean, on the agency side, I'm sure you agree, Austin, recruiting is very sales oriented. And so a lot of the things that you train on are just basic sales skills. I think recruiting as a domain is a sales heavy role. Even if you're recruiting for an internal company, you're still going out there and customizing, personalizing, pitch, right? Getting people excited and understanding what they want, understanding what they don't want. That's all sales. And so I'm glad you brought this up because a lot of times people break into recruiting like us on the agency side, and either they stay in the agency side, or if they leave, a lot of them leave immediately to the internal side. But what you've done is what a lot of people still do, but not as much, I think, from just following and just seeing the industry. But you basically leveraged your experience at this agency. You know what? Maybe I want to just try to get out of recruiting a little bit and just leverage my sales skills into a sales role. And I think even though it might felt like and looked like a risk at that time, it's conceptually, it still makes sense. There's a lot of transferable skills like you talked about.
Yeah.
And then you're like, but then you did that. And what happened when you're like, maybe I want to go back into recruiting? Like what was that catalyst and tipping point for you? Why did you not continue into like the SaaS sales career?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think back to your point you're just talking about, recruiting is the sales arm of HR. So it is exactly a sales role. Your product is different, but just to your point, all the techniques are exactly the same, right? You're selling, you're pitching. And on the recruiting side, you're also pitching on both ends, right? You're pitching the candidate, the opportunity, but then you're also pitching the business where this potential candidate could fit in. And that kind of skill set doesn't really go away if it's agency or internal. Like we still do the same things. So the reason why I left software sales is, quite frankly, I was not very good at software sales. I was almost too forgiving a lot of times with discounts and like empathy towards my customer, which is a little bit of a push because you're trying to hit your revenue goals. And so I sort of realized that what attracted me, what I like about sales is actually the people aspect of the sales part. So I wanted to get back into recruiting. From a fulfillment standpoint, I think recruiting is very rewarding because you're helping people gain opportunities or access to opportunities that they may not have had, whether that's, money for their families or opportunity for their skill set where they had a miss or not the opportunity to learn something in that role. But then you're also helping the business, right? And I think recruiting in HR has become a really well-respected profession in the last, 5 to 10 years. I sort of hate to say that out loud, but I think there's been a lot of mystery around what exactly do HR professionals, do recruiters do? And now businesses today really understand the importance of having a good recruiter to be able to attain and hire the right talent. And then also think through how we're actually becoming more of a people and culture first organization.
Your first company, LinkedIn, and then you joined WeWork, which is again, like really one of the most well-known companies out there. So did you cold apply? How did you get the job? Was it through a headhunter? Was it through a referral? And what was it like as your first real professional experience recruiting in-house, because all you knew was agency? So how was that ramp up for you? How was that experience?
So we're going to tie it all back to JobSpring. I got it through JobSpring Connect.
There you go.
My first manager, Lana Forehand, her husband was working, I don't know if it was executive search or something, but he was essentially staffing WeWork here in New York for their founding engineering recruiters as
Wow.
WeWork was moving into like, we want to pitch ourselves as a tech company. Um, and so they had reached out to me and said, hey, we're hiring for a senior recruiter. You know, we're looking for folks with agency backgrounds to join this team. And I was like, great. This sounds like a great, you know, way to get into internal recruiting, but also working with a coordinator and sourcer, right? Kind of those three pillars of recruiting that really make that machine work. And so another kind of build opportunity again, right? Sort of how do we pitch WeWork as a tech company? What is our interview process? You know, how do we actually, you know, hire at scale internationally across multiple teams? So it was definitely another 0 to 1 opportunity again.
And then you were there during like I guess the peak, right? When everyone was talking. So you were there when everyone was looking and hearing and just reading about WeWork 24/7. You were obviously part of WeWork. What was that like? What just if you could touch upon it briefly for people who are just curious.
Agency, high volume, hire as many people as possible, like go, go, go.
Wow.
I will say I was bad at it in the beginning, horrible, because I didn't have internal recruiting experience. I'd only known agency. But what I think people, if you're looking to make the transition from agency to internal recruiting, there's a lot of project management you got to learn. You know, how do you manage up to your stakeholders? Do they have their job descriptions ready, the interview process formatted? Who are the interviewers? What levels are they? What levels can they interview for? How are you pitching the position and the company and the team? You know, how long should the interviews be? You don't necessarily have as much insight into that on the agency side, where you're just really trying to find an individual. Although you are educating that candidate on the interview process, you're not planning all of that with your customer all the time. And I was put in a position where I was working with a VP of engineering and a VP of product who were very seasoned, like worked at Google and these big companies. And they got me, who was agency and then SaaS salesperson, coming into my first internal recruiting job. And so in the beginning, it was really tough because I had to learn how to make my stakeholders happy, but also recruit. And then once that was sort of settled, how do you actually recruit at scale? I mean, I think we grew from like 75 to 150 in like a year and a half or something. Wow. It was like very intense.
On average, how many like open positions or recs were you responsible for?
I think at one time I had like 39 plus.
How do you prioritize that? How do you manage that? What's your number one advice for handling large volume of open positions?
So at that point I didn't, because I just felt like I was a chicken running with my head cut off and just trying to please everybody. Now learning what I know through my experience, you know, helping Streamlit go 0 to 1 is being extremely thorough in what the headcount plan is. Okay, Q2, we have this. What are our key hires for which teams that are most impactful for our business success, and also who we have staffed? Where are our gaps? Really understanding how to plan and prioritize. Literally, like if you have 30 recs, 1 through 30, segment them through like a quarter and kind of figure it out.
When an acquisition happens, just if you can share with the audience, what goes through your mind, your team's mind? I'm sure there's also a lot of question marks, like what does it mean for my job or our jobs? Because usually acquisition is a positive, but doesn't always have to be a positive event, right? It could also be a negative or maybe an uncertain event. So
sure.
What was your experience real quick?
Yeah, my personal experience was excitement, but terrified at the same time. Really sort of like what you mentioned, like, what is this going to mean? You know, will we be dissolved as an acquisition? How are they going to be using the product? What does that mean for my growth and career trajectory? You know, I was on the path to become a head of talent at Streamlit. You know, I want to eventually get out of just being an individual recruiter. I want to flex and own my management skills and build a team of recruiters. And so I was like, well, what is that going to be? What is that going to mean for my career? Right. That was one of the large reasons why I joined Streamlit. And yeah, I think, you know, with any acquisition, there's certainly trade-offs, both personally, you know, that you would face or the whole company faces. But think we've done a really good job. Well, I actually am now more siloed. I don't work directly with Streamlit anymore. I just recruit for Toronto Snowflake. But I think the transition went smoothly on my end. It was hard to part ways with my Streamlit team, but I'm able to transfer those skills with Toronto with, again, another 0 to 1 recruiting initiative. So yeah, I guess what is this, the 4th time or 5th time? So yeah.
So what's next for you, Austin? Like, do you think that, I mean, you've worked and established yourself as clearly very, very successful in recruiting on the agency and internal side. Is this it? You're going to dig in your heels and just take it as far as you can? So if you were to envision yourself 3 to 5 years from now, what other 0 to 1 initiatives will Austin be a part of? What other M&A acquisition events? Like, what do you think?
It's a good question. I'm thinking about it now. You'll have to stay tuned. Will definitely be something in the talent space. Or maybe I'll pivot and finally follow my passion of fashion and move into that route. So we'll see. I'm still really young, Preston. So we'll see what happens.
Either way, I know you'll crush it. And if ever, Austin, you need a solid reference for your managerial skills, you know who to find. You can always reach out to me.
Awesome.
I'll be like, look what happened. But I am curious, how, in your words, in your experience, how helpful was starting your recruiting career at an agency before you switched to in-house? Like, if you were to just, if your first recruiting job was an entry-level in-house role, would you think you could still be as successful as you are today? Or do you think having that agency experience played a large role?
I don't think I would be as confident or articulate or motivated if I hadn't started on the agency side. I attribute most of my professional success to having experience working in an agency. I don't know if necessarily should have stayed as long as I did, but I think that everyone should be exposed to that breadth of skill set that you get on the agency side. I owe my whole career for like sticking through it. I mean, I got to move to New York. I got to work and recruit for different organizations. I met so many people like yourself that I still keep in touch with. Yeah. So I think it's made a great impact on my career. I would highly recommend it.
Nice. Couple more questions. So for someone that's working a lot on the internal side, what are some of your favorite tools, ATS, plugins that you just cannot live without as a recruiter?
Greenhouse. OG, Gem for sure.
Oh, I mean, you obviously talked about Notion. Okay.
Notion is really great. Yeah, everyone should check out Notion. What else do we use?
Do you have like a favorite like plugin to help you find people's contact info, or I don't know, just make coordinating easier?
Use those like old school, I don't know what even they were, but where you put in like the domain of the engineer's website to find their email. Do you remember what that was called?
Oh, Mail Tester.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I was like, I don't use that anymore. I mean, I'm a little bit far removed from the sourcing aspect now. Like I work with a sourcer typically in my roles, or we've used agencies. So my tool set's probably a little basic, but Notion. Everyone should use Notion.
Huge shout out to Notion. And Austin, what do you think is like how do you think, what is the future of recruiting in your words, or what is like a theme that you're starting to see that maybe is a little bit different now than, for example, 5-7 years ago, for someone that's like in the thick of it at really great technology, fast growth companies?
It's funny, like this is gonna be so cliche, but I think the work from home thing is gonna be an interesting play, mostly because I see the benefit and kind of challenges or risk on both sides. One is being a recruiter, you can work from home and do your job very effectively, for sure. You don't need to go into the office. But on the flip side, I think about it from a management and training perspective, or sitting in the bullpen or whatever we called it back in the day. You learn so much hearing from other people and absorbing how somebody pitches or frames something. How do they negotiate? How do they speak with a different client or candidate, right? Not necessarily code switching, but there are various types of formalities that you might use and be able to craft your own voice. And I think that you don't get that working from home. So I think that might be an interesting thing in the future, is how do we train workforces remotely in roles where there is value in being close to individuals like sales, right? Recruiting. So I think that I'm excited to see what transpires from that. What do
Real
you think?
quick, remote is definitely a top of mind. It's like a very
Yeah,
dynamic and complicated situation. I was just going to ask you though, where on that spectrum do you personally fall? Do you prefer remote roles for yourself, or do you also prefer going to the office here and there?
I prefer hybrid for me. I
Mhm.
think there are certain days and times where I think it's more productive to be at home, but I also am a pretty social person, as you know. So I do like to go into the office and it's a good change of pace. I also live in New York in a small apartment with my partner, so I don't think he needs to hear me on the phone 8 hours a day, pitching the same thing over and over again.
Oh my God. And then what are you seeing in terms of the market? Like, are more people leaning remote, more people leaning office, hybrid, or just it's kind of like an equal?
I would say there's definitely more people who want fully remote or hybrid flexibility.
Mhm.
But I think we need more data. If someone has a report on this, I would love to see it. But being able to understand how micro or macro trends have affected hiring trends. I mean, with the pandemic, there's a lot of folks who moved out of metropolitan cities who potentially bought houses or got bigger spaces. They might have moved away. I mean, trying to get them back into the office at this point is tough. You become accustomed to a certain lifestyle. And honestly, you save time, right?
Mhm.
Like I don't have to have a 30-minute to 1 hour commute and I can spend more time with my family or give myself some time back in the beginning or end of my day. I think that people have changed their mindset on, I don't know, prioritizing themselves. I know for me, that was a big change because I've always been like, dive into my work all the time, like get up at 6, like be in the office, like, it's a different mentality. And I think it's healthier to have a balance like that.
Yeah, I
What
think
do you
it's
think?
cool. I mean, I prefer remote with
Mhm.
aspects of like hybrid and office.
Mhm.
I'm the type of person like you. I just put my head down and I get consumed, and then I just have to like check out for the day at later in the day. But um, I see like a pretty even split with the people that we talk to. It's obviously a little bit heavier with hybrid and compared to full remote, compared to full in office. But
Mhm.
it's just always so funny for me to like talk to someone. They're like, I hate remote. I want full office, right? And then when you talk to them, like, wow, that was actually our lives, like not even like 2, 3 years ago, when the whole remote thing wasn't even a conversation. So
Yeah.
what I think what it is today is going to certainly be different a year, 3 years, 5 years from now. So it'll be very interesting to see like what happens.